Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News. How's everybody doing today? Good, I hope. And today is April 29th, 2022. Friday. Friday, April 29th, 2022. Again, man, those days, they get away from you. Let's start off let's go into cryptid land. And this story is out of Inexplicata and is titled Backwoodsman Encounters the Ucumar, the Andean Bigfoot, and Metán. This is a story out of Argentina. All right, and this is the first report of the Ucumar zupai to reach our desk in many years. Perhaps the climate disruptions experienced in the southern cone over recent months have served to flush out the elusive cousins of the North American Sasquatch. It was like a large, hairy, dark gorilla. It jumped a fence when I lit it with my torch, he said. The chilling story was told in the aftermath of a shock experience by a backwoodsman from Pasteadero, a wilderness area located to the north of Metán, where he claimed having clearly seen the Ucumar. I just finished watching a football match when I heard the dogs barking. They were very restless. I then went outside with my flashlight, and when I lit it up, I saw something incredible with my own eyes. Something I'd never suspected. That horrible thing walked slowly and crossed the fence, said the man who lives alone in an area farm. I didn't try to follow it because I was very scared. I went back inside the house and locked myself in. Couldn't sleep all night, said the gaucho. The backwoodsman says he was raised in the country and had never seen anything like it. The dogs went after that animal but pulled back and returned home. Furthermore, the horses wanted to jump the fence and leave the area. It was awful, he added. He described it as a gorilla or large hairy animal standing some 6 feet tall. That thing was neither human nor a common animal, he affirmed. And I thought that was interesting because I'd never heard of this Sasquatch look-alike called the Ucumar. So there you go. And from there, let's go on to this story out of ancient origins, and it's titled The Truth Behind the Macabre Discovery of Viking Skin on Church Doors. For centuries, it has been believed that the large piece of skin nailed to the door of St. Botolph's Church in Hadstock, near Cambridge in England, was human skin that belonged to a Viking raider who tried to plunder the church. But new research reveals this is not the true story. It turns out there is little substance to the Viking skin myth, as most doors were actually covered with animal hide, according to Cambridge scholar Reardar MacLeod and his colleagues in their presentation at the UK Archaeological Sciences Conference in 2022. The renovation of Hadstock St. Botolph's Church in the late 19th century revealed that the door had a large piece of skin under its metal bands. A local myth accounted for it as being from a would-be Viking pillager of the church in the 11th century AD. He had been flayed alive and a piece of his Viking skin nailed to the door to serve as a grim warning to other looters, according to legends. What's more, St. Botolph's isn't the only church that sports this bizarre deterrent, I'll say. According to another magazine, there are at least 4 known instances of medieval churches in England that display these so-called Viking skins or Dane skins. Although St. Botolph's is the most well-known example, St. Michael and All Angels Church in Copford near Colchester and Westminster Abbey are also similarly embellished. For some time, the debate about these patches of skin, long believed to be Viking skin or human skin at the very least, has been growing among scientists. Scientific tests on samples have given inconclusive results. In the 1970s, for example, Ron Reed, an expert on leather from the University of Leeds in the UK, examined St. Botolph's skin. Not only did he endorse the human skin legend, but Reed also specified that it likely came from a person with fair or graying hair. A subsequent DNA analysis during the BBC program Blood of the Vikings in 2001 pointed to the skin being that of a cow. However, there was a question mark on the accuracy of the results. MacLeod and his colleagues analyzed the skin fragments from all 4 churches' doors using a non-destructive technique called zooarchaeology by mass spectrometry, or ZOO-MS. Notably, the technique has helped scientists pick a single Neanderthal bone from among 2,300 bone fragments belonging to animals like mammoths, woolly rhinos, wolves, and ranger in Russia's Denisova cave. The technique reveals the collagen peptide sequence in bone fragments, allowing scientists to identify to which species a bone once belonged. McLeod and his team rubbed the skins with rubber erasers and then extracted the trypsin digesting peptides that adhered to the eraser waste. They found that none of the 4 skin samples belonged to a human, while the St. Botolph's and Westminster Abbey ones came from bovines. The St. Michael and All Angels Church skins belonged to a horse or donkey. Because both these species have very similar collagen fingerprints, any further pinpointing wasn't possible. The Viking skin or Dane skin myths predate the discovery of the skin at St. Botolph's during its 19th century renovation by centuries. It isn't a case of fitting it to the fact of the skin being discovered, McLeod said, so it's interesting that very convergent myths seem to have arisen for all the churches that we analyzed, that the skins originated from Danish or Viking raiders. Specifically, this is first attested by Samuel Pepys and his diary in 1661. So the idea that these are flayed human skins from Danes has been around for a long time. In the absence of any samples actually proving to be human, it looks like this story might have originated for one of the churches as a local myth first. The accounts for Hadstock and Westminster are among the oldest, and then spread to others quickly where traces of desiccated skin were also found nailed to the door, he added. The 12th century artist Theophilus writes that the practice of nailing treated animal hide to church doors had an aesthetic purpose. Nonetheless, the morbid fascination associated with this myth likely explains its persistence as well as serving as a deterrent to would-be church desecrators. The study by McLeod and his team seems to have settled the rather gruesome church door skin debate once and for all. The bizarre medieval practice of using skin on church doors in England was nothing more than a clever way to prevent church looting, and Viking skin worked best to ward off villains at these 4 notable ancient English churches. Okay, pretty good deterrent there. What can I say? Glad it wasn't for real. Let's go on to this one. This is out of Singular Fortean, and it's titled, "There were 2 creatures with red glowing eyes walking around." All right, this is a report that was sent to them in January of this year, and it read, "When I was 14 in 1994, my dad and one of his friends went on a deer hunt in Greene County, Georgia at the Redlands Wildlife Management Area. We were setting up camp when we realized that I had forgotten the poles to set up the tent. My dad was not happy at all, but we stretched the tarp over his truck bed and slept with the tailgate down. I had fallen asleep and woke up when I heard my dad and his friend talking. I looked out and there were 2 creatures with red glowing eyes walking around. The eyes seemed to be around 3 to 4 feet off the ground. All of the guns were in the cab of the truck and we could not get to them. So we watched them for what seemed like an eternity, but was realistically only about 3 or 4 minutes. They did not make any sound at all, but all of a sudden started running away and we could hear hoofs clattering on the worn gravel road. About 15 seconds after that, a truck came up the road and we did not see them again. It is a mystery to us still to this day what the creatures were. I would be interested to see if anyone had a similar experience in that area." All right, they tried to interview this person, but they were not unable to do so. They wrote, "There are a variety of animals that might be found in Georgia whose eyes appear to glow red when reflecting light, including owls, possums, and black bears. However, no external light that might have caused any such eye shine is described in the witness testimony, nor would that explain the sound of hooves. Hooved animals such as deer more commonly have white eye shine. Red eyes are a commonality among some reported monster sightings, including reports of Bigfoots, winged humanoids, and even stranger entities like the 2 solid black creatures with pointy ears and glowing red eyes reportedly seen by an Ohio man. Often in this case, the witnesses ask if eye shine might be responsible for the glowing red eyes reported, and commonly they report that it could not be, because the eyes appear to be glowing from within instead of reflecting light. What, if any, of this might apply to the story above is unknown, since the witness was not available to provide more information." All right, I thought that was very interesting. It's like, here we're not going only to the story about the the red eyes, 3 or 4 feet tall with hooves. Oh, so we're staying on singular 40, and then we're going on to another report titled Ohio Man Reports Encounters with Two Solid Black Pointy Ears World. Says the town in which the following event took place and the names of those involved have been withheld at the request of the witness who reported it. A man who claimed to have seen two solid black creatures with pointy ears in a small Ohio town when he was a child in the early 1960s. Quote, it was probably around when Kennedy was assassinated back in the 60s. I was born in 53, so it had to be 61 or 62, somewhere around in there, he told investigators. The man said his encounter took place just before sunset one summer day while he and some friends were on the grounds of an abandoned lumber company. I grew up in a small town, he said. We were kids. We were out doing kid things. We went to get some sand for our pet turtles. There was a lumber company that was just down the road that was out of business. My friend said there was sand down there. He'd been down there and got it before. There were a lot of empty buildings and stuff, the man said, and as he approached the sand pile that day, he saw his friend duck down behind a wooden wall surrounding the sand. My friend ducked down and was hiding, he said. Although there were other children present, the witness and his friend were the only ones who approached the sand pile, so nobody else saw what came next. Standing in front of him and his friend, not more than 100 feet away, were two of the strangest beings the witness had ever seen, and apparently the beings had seen them too. I came walking through there and I said to my friend, "What are you doing?" And then I saw it. There were two beings. I mean, they weren't from this world, standing over there. I saw them and all I could do is stand there and look, he said. It finally dawned on me that they had seen us. When these two beings, there were stacks of cement blocks there. They went behind the stacks of cement blocks, and then I got down near my friend. All of a sudden, you could take in what you could until they hid. But these things were not green men, believe me. They were black, solid black. It wasn't long before it got dark after that. This was a nice summer day, and these things were solid black. You could not, if it was dark, there's no way you'd see these things. There were two of them. I was scared because those things had pointed ears. They were human-like, but if they were wearing uniforms, everything was solid black except for one thing. Their eyes were the reddest red I ever saw. But I'm telling you, right down to the very detail was solid black. Now, they were wearing holsters. I know what sidearms are. They were wearing sidearms, and I'd say they had a 45s or a 1911, but they had a flap over the gun, but they were both wearing sidearms. The beings, he estimated, were about the normal height of a person because you could see their shoulders over the stack of those concrete blocks. Their coloration was consistent throughout, he said, with no distinct difference in the color black between any part of their clothes, including the firearms they carried. Their eyes, too, were solid red. The man speculated that perhaps the creatures were waiting for the cover of dark to travel unseen out of town. There was a creek nearby, and when it was dark out, they could follow that creek way out of town, he said. So I'm just guessing, what were they doing there? Probably hiding in the daytime is my guess. They were out roaming around because it was going to get dark pretty soon. Although the sighting didn't last very long, for this witness, it was long enough. The sighting wasn't very long enough you could get a good look at them, and I couldn't move, I could just see them. I don't remember seeing their hands or anything like that, but I could see their upper body, right down to the holster with the guns. He said, I was just shocked. I was just shocked, and actually, until they got behind the cement blocks, then I could move. I knew I had to hide too. When he could move again, the witness and his friend decided that it was time to leave. I told my friend, we've got to get out of here. Let's get the heck out of here, he said. We took off running. There was a crowd of kids down there, and we yelled at them, come on, get out of here. Once we got home, the witness said, although she would later in life begin to believe him after having a paranormal experience of her own, something he could easily dismiss, and it had a lasting impact on him throughout his life. I was scared. I really was. I was scared, and it hung with me to this day, he said. Now, of all the weird things I'm telling you, there isn't a night that I walk out in total darkness that I don't think about these things, because you've never seen them at night. Finally, as an older adult encounters something the man is ready to talk about with others. Most people think you're crazy or something. I'm 68 years old. I might as well get it off my chest, he said. I would take a lie detector test. I swear I would. It's followed me since I was a young boy. You know what you saw. You can't get it out of your mind. It's pretty interesting. Well, this one I had set up. This is also from Singular Fortean, and it's titled Strange Encounter on Easter. They received this story in January of this year as well. And it reads, "Hello, I saw your posting looking for strange holiday encounters and stories. I've never gone on record with a story, but I can still picture it in my head as clear as the day it happened. I don't tell many people this story, as it's often met with ridicule or disbelief, but I can swear on a stack of Bibles that I remember it happening. It happened when I was a child. I'm 28 now, so I must have been maybe 7 years old or younger at the time. I was very young. I would say maybe 1999 or 2000, but I'm not fully sure. I remember it was Easter morning. I was on the floor of my parents' living room, watching some Easter special, playing with whatever new toy I got in my Easter basket, and feasting upon chocolate goodies. I can clearly remember not hearing any sort of sound or something that would draw my attention. Yet I looked out the sliding glass door of the living room that went to the fenced-in backyard. We lived in a residential neighborhood on a busy street with numerous neighbors around, so we weren't out in the sticks by any means. As I looked out the sliding glass door, I saw a flash of color. I distinctly remember white and blue and purple. I got up and looked out the window and saw something I'll never forget. Jumping over the fence into our backyard was a 6 to 7 foot tall rabbit man. It had the face of a rabbit with those cold darting eyes and twitching nose. Ears up and tall. White to cool blue purple coloring in the fur. It didn't have an Easter basket or anything funny like that. It stood on 2 legs, which were flat like a rabbit's hind legs with large, powerful haunches. I don't even remember what exactly the arms looked like, but I remember it held them close to its body. It jumped over the fence from the neighbor's house and landed in our yard. I stood there in awe at this thing, hopped across the backyard. It stood for a second and looked at me and proceeded to jump over the adjacent fence into the next neighbor's yard. That was the last I saw of it. I immediately told my parents of what I saw, and they laughed and said I'd watched too many Easter specials. They confirmed with me there was nobody running around in the neighborhood in an Easter bunny costume. This was broad daylight, so it was odd that nobody else took notice of this thing. Maybe we'll investigator. And I've gone on a numerous Sasquatch expedition, and I've had what I believe to be a few encounters through the years. I spent numerous field hours looking for UFOs and going on ghost hunts and things like that. Yet this always stuck in the back of my mind, and most out of anything." All right. Now, again, they couldn't follow up with this person to ask him more questions. And they write, "While rare, reported sightings of encounters with mythological beings associated with major holidays are not unheard of." They said they had received the year before a report from a witness named Haley Pierce, who said that when she was 8 years old, she had stepped outside of the Christmas Eve service at her local church in Lancaster, Ohio, only to see what appeared to be a sleigh pulled by reindeer flying overhead. All right, and researcher Stephen Wagner has posted a list of over a dozen such sightings. The witnesses in these encounters are unsurprisingly almost exclusively children, with a lone outlier being a sighting what was, in all likelihood, a perfectly normal human being. The sightings reports are either partially or entirely anonymous and generally describe up-close encounters with Santa Claus inside of the witness's home. So far as the Singular Fortean Society is aware, the report submitted by Pierce could very well be the first such sighting to be given completely on the record. Multiple competing hypotheses exist to explain these holiday-themed encounters, with the most skeptical including dreams, hallucinations, misidentifications, and outright hoaxes, while more paranormal explanations include Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and other such entities as living thought forms. along with the possibility that these things are being used as a disguise or otherwise projected by another unrelated paranormal entity or phenomena. And I mentioned this one time before. There's an old movie with Jimmy Stewart in it titled Harvey. And it goes back a while back, because if I remember correctly, Jimmy Stewart was still young. A 6 foot tall rabbit that is his companion. And it's referred to as a puka. And Jimmy Stewart, well, his character, has a reputation of being kind of a peculiar guy, drinks a little bit, so everybody puts his friend as his imagination. And it's even to the point that, he brings him to the table and, be careful, you're going to sit on Harvey. And that's the whole movie. It's a really cute movie. But then at the very end, he's leaving, and he leaves through this, there's a white picket fence, and he opens the gate and he leaves. And then the gate opens by itself. The meaning being that Harvey wasn't made up. Harvey was something, because it opened the gate. So if anybody has a chance, look that up. That's a neat little movie. So, something that dovetails with this. Let's go on. This is a this is a story that I wrote up on this one. This is out of the Eerie News website, and this one's titled "New Lead on Apache Junction, Jane Doe." Nearly 30 years ago, the body of a teen female was found in the Arizona desert. She was unidentified, and the police department dubbed her Apache Junction Jane Doe. In August of 1992, west of Idaho Road and south of US 60, a man walking his dog found the remains of a girl that was believed to have died 5 weeks before she was discovered. The area is known for transient activity. Due to the state of the corpse, the cause of death remained undetermined. She is believed to be of Hispanic, African American, Caucasian descent. She was around 5 feet tall with an unknown height. She had protruding teeth that were poorly maintained. Apache Junction Jane Doe wore her coarse brown hair in a ponytail. She was wearing Levi denim cutoff shorts and a Team Gear soccer t-shirt with soccer balls on front and back. She wore a yellow metal ring on her left ring finger and a Phoenix Transit System token, valid for one student fare. Stephanie Bourgeois, a crime scene technician with the Apache Junction Police Department, took the case over in 2008. Along with the help of DNA Doe Project, DDP, there was an effort made to identify the girl. Jane Doe's fingerprints and hair strands are submitted to databases for possible matches. A year ago, police were able to connect to possible family members. They found Jane Doe's cousin, who gave information about Jane's half-aunt, who learned she had a half-brother named Bernard Lyon Newman via a birth certificate left by her father. In other words, Jane found out she had a half-brother, I guess because her father left her. Surprise, here's a birth certificate of your half-brother. Anyway, this Bernard Lyon Newman was born in 1953 in Germany. His father was an African-American soldier stationed in Germany, and his mother was a German woman named Elsie Newman. Armed only with his birth date and the name of his biological parents, the U.S. Department of State helped to locate him in North Carolina. He was told that he had a relative who was unidentified for almost 3 decades. He did not find out he was adopted until he was 18 and enlisted in the military. He never even used the name of Bernhard, and his present name, taken from his adoptive parents, remains undisclosed. After his DNA was uploaded to a global database, the match indicated he was Jane Doe's uncle. This proved that since he was a full uncle, he has full sibling of an unknown age who is Jane Doe's father. The DTP looked for other children born with the same biological parents, but so far none have been found. Jane Doe's father is half African American and German, possibly adopted by a family in the military with ties to New York. So, of course, if you find anything like that, need to get in touch with the Apache Junction Police Department in Arizona. So apparently, based on what they say, this couple, this soldier and this German woman, they had at least two children that were full siblings, and there was birth certificates issued, and at some point these children were put up for adoption. So I think, and I've talked about it before, what the use of DNA in solving these cases, it's tremendous, because some of these cases are cold. Like, I mean, good luck on getting anything, um, you know, significant out of them, and DNA is making things possible. Now, the next story is on ancient origins, and it's titled "The Antonym Plague and the Downfall of the Roman Empire." The Antonym Plague, which happened between 165 and 180 AD, was a disastrous pandemic deemed so catastrophic that many historians have argued that it was the first major event to usher in the decline of the Roman Empire. This cataclysmic Antonym Plague was even recorded in the historical annals of ancient China, which reported 7 out of 11 pandemics during the 2nd century occurring between the years of 160 to 190. The disease likely spread through the interconnected pathways of the Silk Road trade route, whose tendrils covered the vast swaths of Europe and Asia, making the pandemic one of the first truly international disasters. Certainly, the social, economic, and military impact of the Antonine Plague weakened Rome's power significantly, making the once great empire a shadow of its former self and increasingly unable to defend itself from hostile forces. In 165 AD, under the command of the ambitious general Lucius Verus, the Roman legionnaires laid siege to Seleucia, an important Parthian stronghold, as part of a wider effort to finally subdue the East under Emperor Marcus Aurelius. The discipline and training of Rome's great armies proved too much for the Parthian foe, who capitulated as their city was burnt to the ground by Roman leaders and their battle-hardened men. Victory, however, was short-lived. It was after sacking and looting of the city that Roman soldiers started to notice strange black bumps appearing on their skin as a foul pestilence started to ravage the ranks. As the victorious soldiers returned home, perhaps back to Rome, or to be stationed on the Romano-Germanic border to guard against the opportunistic tribes of the hinterlands beyond, the disease started to rapidly spread among the populace. One of the first indications of the new malady, which could last for up to 2 weeks, was a fever, which was neither warm nor burning. Diarrhea was another major symptom, with the blackness of the stools often determining survival chances, as those with the darkest color most commonly died. The sickness also caused inflammation and internal ulcerations, the sufferer often coughing up the internal scabs caused by the latter. In addition, the voice was made gravelly and weak by larynx infection. The breath became fetid and rotten, and constant mucus buildup in the throat only heightened the severity of the cough. The Antonym Plague became one of the biggest, let me go back. The principal symptom was a large dark skin rash called an exanthum, which would peel off like a scale if the patient survived. It's also the main reason scholars have identified the disease as being smallpox, which shares the same characteristic mark. The Andean plague became one of the biggest health catastrophes in Rome's illustrious history, with up to a third of the empire's population perishing. Dio Cassius, the Roman commentator, claimed that deaths reached 2,000 a day at its peak. Many saw the plague as a divine punishment against the Romans and a sign from the gods that they had gone too far during their conquest of the East. Some attributed the plague to Lucius Verus, who allegedly opened a closed tomb in Seleucia, releasing the contagion into the ancient world. Others suspected that the blame could be put on a Roman soldier who opened a golden casket in the Temple of Apollo, supposedly setting the illness free. Orosius, a Roman historian, reported on the severity of the new plague on the populace of the Roman Empire thus. There followed an epidemic which spread through many provinces, and the plague which ravaged Italy was so great that everywhere farms, fields, and cities without cultivators and abandoned by their inhabitants gave place to ruin and woodlands. The account of Aelius Aristides illustrated how rapid the infection spread and how it didn't distinguish between old, young, or even species. Quote, I happened to be in the suburbs of the height of summer. The plague infected nearly all my neighbors. First 2 or 3 of my servants grew sick, then one after another. Then all were in bed, both the younger and the older. I was last to be attacked. The livestock, too, became sick, and if anyone tried to move, he immediately lay dead before the front door. Everything was filled with despair and wailing and groans. Every kind of difficulty. An anonymous Roman author outlined the desperate attempts of the Roman consuls to allow people of all classes to grieve for the dead. Quote, thousands were carried off by the pestilence, including many nobles, for the most prominent of whom Antonius erected statues. Such too was the kindliness of his heart that he had funeral ceremonies performed for the lower classes, even at the public expense. Indeed, with the deaths of so many of the upper caste of society, Marcus Aurelius was forced to take extreme measures in Athens, where a shortage of political office holders plunged the Roman outpost into administrative crisis. Traditionally, Rome could only apply for political office if they had 3 generations of Roman citizenship. The rules were drastically changed in Athens in 174 and 175, with a letter sent to emissaries by the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Lamenting the disasters which had befallen, Oresius declared, I compromise and grant to the Athenians that in respect to the family's past they considered only this, whether a man has a father of good birth, and if anyone appears to have been expelled by the Areopagus on account of the rule concerning 3 generations, he shall recover his rank, and this it will suffice for both parents of a man to have been born free. In other words, as long as both of your parents were free, you didn't need that 3 generation stuff. They must have been desperate. Even at the top echelon of society, the disease was equally unrelenting, claiming the life of Lucius Verus in 169, and eventually the emperor who succumbed to the plague in 180. The Antonine Plague destroyed the Roman economy, leaving it in tatters and ruin. Evidence from surviving land leases from Egypt, part of the bread bowl of the empire, and where the plague probably entered Europe, showed the devastating impact of population death on agriculture and food production. A set of 53 land leases illustrated that before 165, that each possessed a relatively large area of plots of 20 auras, or over. However, after 165, they had an average of only 8 auras, and during the 170s, this is reduced to only 7. The duration of the leases also decreased, as 1 to 3 year leases virtually disappear from the record after 166. In addition, during the period 165 to 183, rent significantly lessens, with the highest rents of the period being only half of the highest prices before 165, with a 25-year low occurring in 182. The lack of Roman citizens is further exemplified by a salary increase in Egypt, with field laborers having their wages doubled from 4 to 7 obols in 152 to 10 to 14 obols in 169. Merchants and tradesmen, alongside less skilled workers, also suffered heavy losses, as a petition by an association of traders from Puteoli in 174 complained they couldn't afford the rent of their headquarters because of the decimation of their ranks by disease. Elsewhere, the interruption to public building construction further highlighted the manpower shortages caused by the Antonine Plague. The records indicate the complete disruption to public construction between 166 and 180, which heralded the first significant break since the establishment of the empire by Emperor Augustus nearly 200 years before. In fact, there were several major economic deviations during Marcus Aurelius's reign, including a 50% decrease in expenditure on Italian public buildings and a 25% decrease in the rate of public inscriptions. This was exacerbated by the lower production of construction materials around the empire. At the imperial quarries of Rome at the Dosimum in Phrygia, where the famous white Roman marble was mined, evidence suggests a break in production from the mid-160s lasting until 173. Another quarry located in Teos and Asia Minor further attests to production decrease, as 14 out of 26 inscribed blocks found at the site dated from 163 to 166, suggesting the bricks had lain idle or sent out. Of economic crisis, as the scarcity of large hoards of coins dating after 167 implies that a dip in production took place from that year. This can further be compounded by the complete suspension of coin minting in Egypt from 170 to 177, an area which the pandemic hit hardest. The losses incurred by the Roman military to the Antonym Plague were staggering, mortally weakening their military powers. Several writers of the time mentioned the complete collapse of Roman military power because of the new strain. The Roman scholar Jerome particularly emphasized the total annihilation of the army during outbreaks in 168 and 172. There was such a plague throughout the whole world that the Roman army was reduced almost to extinction. Elsewhere, Eutropius would comment on how a large part of the population in Rome, Italy, and the provinces and almost all the military forces fell victim to the disease. The phenomenon of military decline can be seen in army discharge certificates from the time, which vanished after 167, only to resume 10 years later with only a trivial amount of cases. Others, like Orosius, noted the impact that the pandemic was having on the Marcomannic Wars, a series of skirmishes against the German barbarians on Rome's northern frontiers. Quote, as for the Roman army and all the legions widely dispersed in winter quarters, it is said that their numbers were reduced to the point where the wars against the Marcomanni, which began immediately afterward, could only be undertaken thanks to a new conscription of troops. In the face of a dwindling military force, the Roman army was forced to expand the eligibility of Roman soldiers, an unprecedented move that shocked many contemporary writers. Quote, and since the pestilence was still raging at this time, he, Marcus Aurelius, trained slaves for military service. Just as he had been done in the Punic Wars, he armed gladiators also, and turned even the bandits of Dalmatia and Dardania into soldiers. He armed the Diagamatae, beside and even hired auxiliaries from among the Germans for service against the Germans. Marcus Aurelius' patchwork armies proved inferior to the phalanxes of professional soldiers that would usually make up the Roman legions, a fact confirmed by a major military defeat in 167 on the Germano-Roman frontier. For the first time in nearly 200 years, German tribes were able to make incursions beyond the Rhine River, which only became more frequent as the pandemic continued to rage on throughout the 160s and 170s. Assisting Roman military failure was the economic crisis, which led to a decrease in Roman subsidies to the barbarian kingdoms beyond the Rhine, a tactic that had successfully pacified their unruly neighbors for hundreds of years prior. The Antonym Plague was an extremely traumatic and novel experience for ancient Rome and represented the first serious decline in its history ever since the establishment of the empire by Emperor Augustus in 27 BC. For those who experienced it, the Antonine pandemic seemed like the end of all times. Coins excavated between 168 to 172, featuring the image of the goddess Salus, preventer of disaster, showed that the Romans were desperate to invoke the protection of the gods from the plague in any way possible. Elsewhere, amulets and trinkets from the time meant to ward off evil continue to be unearthed by archaeologists, as do statues of Apollo, which were erected by many Roman cities for divine defense. Indeed, cities as centers of commerce and population movement located on busy trade routes were the worst affected areas, and Rome, as the hub of empire, was the most vulnerable to the pandemic. Frontier areas, which acted as doorways from one trade link to another, were also highly affected, such as Egypt, which reported devastating losses of taxpayers in 168 and 169, and later in 179. Esconapio, Nessos, where one-third of all taxpayers died or fled following a sharp rise in mortality. A factor beyond the control of European warlords may have contributed and assisted the outbreak of disease. Volcanic activity in 153, 161, and 181 illustrated the existence of colder climatic conditions for the second half of the 2nd century, which in turn led to crop failures. The Little Ice Age explained the susceptibility of the population to the disease because of nutritional deficiencies and malnutrition, which arose from bad harvests. Colder temperatures also provided the perfect breeding ground for smallpox, which is a winter disease. In the end, it was Rome's very success as an interconnected and populous kingdom, alongside exacerbating climatic conditions, which led to its very downfall. When all roads lead to death, not Rome. That's really interesting, because it was like a domino effect. When one thing went wrong, it affected everything else, and it just boomeranged back, making everything worse all over again. And no people to work, no people to pay taxes, no people, period. And then nobody to harvest, well, plant and harvest. So, of course, no food. And then, you're talking famine and starvation. And then, of course, to make it all worse, you have a mini ice age and volcanoes going off. Wow. Talk about, what's that? When it rains, it pours. Okay, in the last story, which I found was really interesting, this is from Down East, titled When a Shadowy Maine Estate Was an Epicenter of Psychics and Psychedelics. One Sunday afternoon in August of 1955, the world-renowned British author Aldous Huxley stepped out of a small commuter plane in Owl's Head, climbed into a taxi bound for Rockport. The 61-year-old novelist and multiple Nobel nominee was struck by the beauty of the rock-bound coast, but he hadn't come to Maine for a vacation. That spring, at a gathering hosted by a well-heeled acquaintance in New York, a scion of the Astor family, Huxley had met a young scientist named Dr. Henry Puharich, a captain in the Army Medical Corps, and a parapsychologist interested in extrasensory perception and the clinical application of psychedelic drugs. What could go wrong? The charming doctor had excitedly described experiments he'd conducted before his army hitch, with mediums, telepaths, and psychics, all at a remote compound on the Maine coast, a research facility called the Round Table Laboratory of Experimental Electrobiology. Huxley, best known for his 1931 dystopian novel Brave New World, had the year before published what would become, arguably, his second most influential work, a book-length essay called Doors of Perception, detailing an experimental trip with peyote, derivative mescaline. A well-known spiritualist and seeker, Huxley was fascinated by Puharich and later wrote of the encounter. Puharich is a lively bird, and I look forward to seeing what he does when he gets out of the army. The taxi delivered Huxley to a 45-room mansion overlooking the wooded inlet of Glen Cove, known locally as the Warrenton Estate, where a freshly discharged Dr. Puharich had invited him to observe experiments he'd recently begun anew. Huxley wasn't sure what he would find at the seaside campus. He knew, he wrote later, that Puharich had been giving lysergic acid, or LSD, to his volunteer research subjects, and the doctor had told Huxley about his fascination with a certain yellow-spotted psychoactive mushroom, native to Maine. In a letter to another psychedelic researcher, Huxley wrote that Dr. Puharich suspected the mushroom might open the doors of ESP in a big way. Provided, Huxley added, almost as an afterthought, it doesn't first open the doors of an untimely grave. Few people alive today remember the enigmatic Round Table Foundation, which operated in Rockport from the late 1940s to the late 1950s. Even then, it was mysterious to outsiders, although it was well known within the tight circles of parapsychological researchers. The facility it funded hosted some of the 20th century's most prominent and controversial psychics and mediums, and even attracted the attention of the U.S. military, which saw potential in using the power of the mind to advantage. for the U.S. in its Cold War with the Soviets. Purich, who died in 1995, has been hailed as the father of the New Age movement. In life, his work was celebrated by the enthusiasts of the paranormal and condemned by skeptics. Today, the Roundtable Foundation is routinely name-checked by both serious historians of Cold War-era covert research and tinfoil hat types concerned with everything from extraterrestrials to the Illuminati to the Kennedy assassination. Henry Purich, who later in life adopted his childhood nickname, Andrija, first came to Maine in December 1947 after completing his medical doctorate at Northwestern University and a residency in Oakland, California. He was visiting an old friend in Camden, the violinist and fellow ethnic Croat, Slatko Balakovic, and his wife Joyce Borden Balakovic, an heiress to a family fortune made in dairy and industrial products. Purich was taken with Joyce, who nursed an interest, not uncommon at the time, among the East Coast elite in mysticism and the uncanny frontiers of psychology. Spiritually, she was a live wire, recalls Mary Bach, Joyce Balakovic's great-niece, who lives today at the Camden farm, where Purich first visited her great-aunt. She did meditation regularly. I think that she was very interested in parapsychology and realized this was very new stuff coming to the surface, and she wanted to support it. Purich, already interested in the electrochemical nature of consciousness, was captivated by Joyce's view on subjects like extrasensory perception. He was impressed with Camden, too, as his second wife, Bep Hermans, later described in a posthumous biography. He felt a powerful and irrational conviction that he did not want to live anywhere else, she wrote, that he had to come back to establish a laboratory in Camden by the sea. The Balakovics made this possible, introducing the young researcher to a circle of benefactors that included some of the country's most blue-blooded surnames: Forbes, Cabot, DuPont. The check that got the Roundtable Foundation off the ground was written by Alice Astor Bouverie, at whose New York residence Purich would eventually meet Huxley, according to Pulitzer-nominated journalist Annie Jacobson, who writes extensively about Purich in her new book Phenomenon, The Secret History of the U.S. Government's Investigations into Extrasensory Perception and Psychokinesis. That's a title. Bouverie's initial donation to Purich totaled $106,000, more than $1 million today. In 1949, Purich's patrons established the 31-year-old scientist at Glen Cove along with his wife, one young daughter and soon a second, and a team of assistants. His research over the course of the next several years tight-walked and transgressed the lines dividing legitimate science, the fringes of neuropsychology, and out-and-out occult pseudoscience. Purich's more traditional research concerned the five known senses. He ran experiments on the psychology of taste through a research fellowship with General Foods Corporation and studied audio waves and the nature of sound transmission in humans and animals. As Jacobson writes, Purich knew that some exceptional individuals could hear beyond most people's typical audible range, and he wondered whether there might be a telepathic equivalent. Watch long trails of birds in migration, the unerring return of the homing pigeon, the struggle of the fish going upstream to spawn, the orderly movement of armies of ants, he wrote in an introduction to his lab's mission. Such movements in nature, he theorized, could be attributed to a sensitivity to some force, some of which we already know, some of which are unknown. Purich's most arcane research, meanwhile, involved gathering sensitives from around the world to stay at Glen Cove while volunteering for experiments on the nature of their abilities. His staff built a set of copper-lined booths, known as Faraday cages, to block out radio waves and other electromagnetic interference, the better to isolate a potential psychic inside. One early Roundtable resident was an Irish medium named Eileen Garrett, who held a series of headline-making seances in the United Kingdom. Purich and his team placed her in a Faraday cage and asked her to guess the image in a set of cards and predict the results of coin flip, among other tasks, then gauged her score as they charged her cage with various frequencies of electricity. In case anybody doesn't know, Eileen Garrett was a psychic that accompanied Hans Holzer on many of his investigations or interviews. She acted as his medium when he started doing some of his work into the 50s and 1960s. One Camden resident, now 68, and preferring anonymity, recalls a trip to a Faraday cage while visiting Glen Cove to play with Poorich's daughter. The scientist found the girls in the kitchen, she says, and invited them into the lab, where she remembers being ushered into a lightless booth, read a list of 5 words, and asked to repeat them back. After a few minutes of this, the then 7-year-old got scared. To tell you the truth, I didn't like being in the dark, she says, so I said, I have to go to the bathroom. They let me out, and I heard him say to somebody else, she's really not a good subject for this. My grandparents threw a fit when they found out. Alien messengers, shamanic trances, ancient Egyptian prophecies. As time went by, Poorich's work at Round Table spiraled into the territory that made ESP look mundane. He developed a fascination with a Hindu mystic, one of the lab's many sensitive guests, who claimed to communicate with enlightened extraterrestrial beings. In 1953, after delivering a briefing to a Pentagon panel on potential military uses of ESP, he was conscripted into the U.S. Army. Poorich served a 2-year stint at the Edgewood Chemical Biological Center in Maryland, and Jacobson cites declassified documents indicating that his work there included a research project described as an that was my crazy dog. Wow. A research project described as an effort to locate a drug that might enhance ESP. I don't know, did that wake everybody up? It sure woke me up. When he returned to Glen Cove in 1955, Poorich was obsessed with a little-known mushroom he learned of during his army hitch, a hallucinogenic and mildly toxic fungus allegedly used in shamanic cultures to incite out-of-body experiences. When Huxley visited that year, it was to witness the mushroom's effects on one of Poorich's subjects, a Dutch sculptor known to fall into trance-like states and scribble hieroglyphs while channeling a 5,000-year-old Egyptian prince named Rahotep. Huxley, who stayed 2 weeks at Poorich's strange households, recalled the experience favorably. It was all very lively, and I really think promising, he wrote in a letter. For whatever may be said against Poorich, he is certainly very intelligent, extremely well-read, and highly enterprising. His aim is to reproduce by modern pharmacological, electronic, and physical methods the conditions used by the shamans for getting into a state of traveling clairvoyance, and then, if it succeeds, to send people to explore systematically the other world. But within a year of Huxley's visit, the quest for the other world in Maine began to unravel. Poorich's wife, Ginny, had for years suffered depression and mental health issues. She was briefly institutionalized, and in the spring of '56, she left Glen Cove to stay with family in Wisconsin. Poorich was at the time carrying on an affair with his children's au pair, of which not all his benefactors approved. When Alice Astor Bouverie, Round Table's prime Mary Prayton, died unexpectedly in July 1956, Poorich's research went into a financial tailspin. He left Maine to seek mystical mushrooms in Mexico, and the Round Table Foundation formally shut down in 1957. Poorich's career in paranormal research lasted decades more, until his death in 1995. He wrote books with titles like The Sacred Mushroom, Key to the Door of Eternity, and traveled the world seeking people with unexplained abilities. In the 70s, he came briefly to national prominence after discovering and promoting the Israeli psychic Uri Geller, famous for bending spoons on television. These days, you can't almost Google a paranormal conspiracy theory without Poorich's name coming up. Back in Maine, meanwhile, the former Round Table estate became the Glen Cove Bible School in 1959. It has since turned into condominiums. The Egyptian channeling sculptor Harry Stumpt settled in the Mid-Coast and became a stalwart of the state's arts community. And they profiled him in '73, and there was no mention of Rahotep. In a biography of Stumpt, Maine journalist Lloyd Ferris quotes a former pastor who attended the Glen Cove Bible College in the early 1960s. Administrators at the school burned all of the Round Table's papers. They also sealed off a tunnel leading to the ocean where the seminarian believed Poorich's Faraday cages were stored. I always had a funny feeling about that place, the one-time minister told Ferris. There were some negative vibes. I have to laugh because, if you give somebody hallucinogenics, everybody becomes psychic. Everybody becomes a shaman. It's like, I don't know. If you're going to experiment first, if somebody's psychic, it's like, what can they do without the aid of pharmacology? Yeah, if you want to be a shaman or whatever, but the real psychic is like, what what ability does this person have without mushrooms, without LSD, without any of this? And I would love to know, after this, the equivalent of almost a 1 million in today's money of and probably more, because he probably got money from a lot of people that were in that, what they call the East Coast elites. What did he have to show for it? What, 10 years? What happened? He discovered what? What happened when he stuck people in those Faraday cages and fed them magic mushrooms? Interesting. All right. I hope you all like this Walk on the Weird Side for today, April 29, 2022. I will be back soon with some more crazy and weird stories. And until then, take care.